Welcome to RSA. I'm Linda Grindstaff, Vice President at McAfee in our Office of the CTO. And I'm excited to be here with you today to discuss through your mind's eye what biases are impacting your security posture. Be sure to enter your questions in chat as I'll be answering questions throughout the presentation. Let's get started. Cybersecurity personnel such as yourselves have many things on your plates to address every single day. You may be feeling like this woman here in the picture as you're dealing with what alerts need to be investigated, what systems need to be patched for the latest vulnerabilities, to what do you need to tell your board of directors in that upcoming meeting. We all make thousands of decisions every day. However, our brains don't give each decision equal attention. We take mental shortcuts. These mental shortcuts are known as biases and allows us to be able to react quickly to situations. Security and biases are not topics that are typically discussed together. However, we all have biases that shape who we are. As a result, our decisions in and out of security can be impacted. So let me ask you, do you feel that you are biased? No need to answer out loud, but the biases that we do have influenced and shaped who we are today in both good and bad ways. So what do you see when you see these pictures? Do you see vases or faces? Do you see a young woman or an older woman, or a duck or a rabbit? I know many of you have seen these type of pictures before, and my point of showing you is that while we're all looking at the same picture, you may see one or both of the objects in the pictures. This is representative of what happens in real life. Many of us are at the same meetings together, but we leave with different perspectives about the discussion based on our biases. And these cognitive biases influence us in many ways. For those of you that don't know, a cognitive bias is a result of our brain's attempt to simplify processing of information. The formal definition in the dictionary says it's a systematic pattern of deviation from norms in judgment. But we as individuals create our own subjective reality from the perception of those inputs that we have. And our construction of reality, not the objective inputs, are going to dictate our behavior in the world. So let's look at the different types of cognitive biases that could be affecting your company's security posture. And as I go through these, I'll close with some tips for you on how to overcome those biases. One side note as we go through the biases that you're going to see is that they're not mutually exclusive. You'll see many overlaps and things that may hopefully relate to you in your day-to-day activities. The first area is availability bias. Availability bias is a mental shortcut that our brains use based on past examples relating to information that's available to us on a specific topic, event, or decision. This information could come from things that we saw in the news, we heard from a friend, something we read, something we experienced, for instance. Basically, it's something that's recalled in our memory quickly. And when we hear that information frequently, we are able to recall it quickly. Thus, our brains feel that it's important to us. And then our brains think, well, information that we recall fast must be important, more important than alternatives. And with all those urgent interrupts that we have and the volume of things and decisions that we have to think about and to figure out that need to be made by all of us on the executive levels, in our CISOs and our administration, it's very easy to get caught up in the decision making based on the past information that's available to us or the present information that we see in the news or things like that. And so how does this bias impact security? For risk assessment, availability bias may show up when your company board of directors looks for an updated risk assessment. Rather than focusing on the entire company, data could be presented with respect to an area for which another company had a breach. For example, we've seen SolarWinds in the news a lot lately in the first part of this year. And the risk assessments, have they been looking at all aspects of the business in depth and not just focusing on supply chain because that's what we had heard about in the news? Are there issues in your environment that require more attention than what is trending that you see in the news or that people are talking about? Risk assessment is also related to overall preparedness. We see availability bias play out in organizations preparing for things such as a high impact but low probability events, instead of preparing for high probability events. High impact and low probability events are things like an airplane crash, or a volcano eruption, or shark attack, or even a meteorite hitting Earth. These events have a high impact but a low probability to occur. We tend to remember those events more, though, than higher probability events. For example, when was the last time that we heard about a ransomware attack, or the last time someone's PII was stolen? Those are more of a high impact, but low probability events, but we tend to not remember those as much as the high probability ones. And so what happens is that our environments and our administration and people in our organizations, they tend to prepare for the wrong things. And if you listen to Steve Grobman's keynote earlier, you saw that what we should be worrying about doesn't always align with what we do worry about, and we're focused on the wrong things as an organization. In the areas of decision making, your CISO or the cybersecurity analyst may make decisions in favor of hot topics in the news. And these topics may overshadow other information that they know but aren't exposed to as much. So as a result, decisions are made that aren't well-rounded. For example, if there was a recent IoT-related issue, similar to what we had back in 2016 with the Dyn attacks, your analysts may over-focus on IoT-related items and neglect things like investing in new security solutions for, say, your mobile devices. Around incident response. During an incident, emotions are running high, and typically we need to address the incident quickly. Availability bias may show up in that we are not actually looking at the bigger picture as to what's going on during the incident, and focus on seeing only where the incident occurred without ensuring we don't have another issue waiting in the wings. Let's say somebody broke into your home through a window. Your first thought may be to secure all of the windows quickly. But if you didn't look at all of your security risk, you may forget that you can shake your garage door and it'll pop right open. And these are just a few examples where when you're looking at incident response that you really need to focus on everything that's happening. And our analysts are typically exploring data thoroughly. However, executives may not always have in-depth information. So if you're at the executive level, I would definitely recommend that you're reviewing all the facts beyond what is available quickly in your mind so you can get the full picture of the incident. How prepared are you for those risks? If you're an analyst or in a position of influence, I would recommend summarizing the facts so that they accurately reflect the probability of those events occurring, as well as considering all possible events. Another bias that we see in cybersecurity is confirmation bias. Confirmation bias is when you look for things to confirm your own beliefs, or you may remember things that only confirm to your beliefs, similar to what we just discussed with availability bias. For example, your news feed may be full of things related to your political beliefs based on what articles you've been clicking on, liked, or sharing. Chances are it's not filled with things that oppose your beliefs. Where we tend to see confirmation bias in cybersecurity is in decision-making. Are you considering all of the different points of view? Or are you just looking to your close group of trusted advisors who may think like you? Are you willing to push and challenge your own beliefs to ensure that you're doing the right thing for your company and making the best decisions possible? What's your company's security hygiene? Are you diligent about updating systems? Or do you believe that it won't happen to you because it hasn't happened yet? Are you using an XDR solution in your environment? Or do you feel that that's just the latest buzzword of the industry and you don't need it because your current systems are serving your needs just fine? Do you feel that you're more secure when you're in the cloud versus on-prem, despite human error can affect both? For risk assessment and preparedness, How do you approach cybersecurity preparedness? Are you passive, reactive, or progressive? Similarly to hygiene, do you feel an incident won't happen to me, so you look past the data to confirm that? Or are you looking for that data, and so you're feeling like you may have a repeat incident if you don't do everything possible? Whatever data you're looking for, is it confirming your beliefs or really focusing on the data that showing all of the facts and the evidence? Are you looking at everything that you personally know well from when you were early in your career, or are you looking at what's actually happening in your environment? I've seen some analysts ignore some of the alerts that come in because they weren't quite sure how to deal with those newer alerts. So they just end up falling back to what they know from early on in their career, or really just looking at the information that's readily available instead of actually looking at everything that's possible. Around pen testing, sometimes companies may hire third-party companies, or they themselves may have penetration testing performed in their environments. When you define the scope of your pen testing, are you looking for the gaps or the holes, or are you just focusing on the weaknesses and the strengths? When the results come in from the analysis, do you address everything that is recommended, or are you only focusing on the items that you believe will impact just you and your business? I know it's hard to look beyond what we believe because in our eyes, that's ground truth. Our beliefs are all we have, and that's what we feel is the right thing. But it's important when you're making security decisions that we're looking beyond what we want to hear or see, and not only looking at what shows up in our news feeds, but also looking at the full, complete picture of the facts and the evidence. Unconscious or implicit bias are where social stereotypes about certain groups of people that we form outside our own conscious awareness. So just as you see this picture here on the left, that is similar to our mind, and our mind is like an iceberg, where our conscious mind is what we can recall quickly and what we are aware of. So that would be similar to the iceberg that's sticking out of the water of what you can see and what you know. But just like with an iceberg, only 10% sticks out of the water and the bulk of it is underneath. That's very similar to our brains in that the subconscious mind is what's slightly underneath the water, speaking with our conscious mind, in that our subconscious mind stores our beliefs, our previous experiences, our memories, etc. And so when you have an idea or maybe a memory from the past, that's coming from the subconscious area of the brain that our conscious mind asked for. But our unconscious mind is deep inside the brain. So just similar to an iceberg, it's very deep down inside of the ocean. Everyone holds unconscious beliefs about various social groups, activities, or things. And these biases stem from our upbringings. They stem from the influences that we've had in our lifetime. And so therefore, we have a tendency to organize our world by categorizing them quickly. And it allows us to often think in just a very fast way and to make quick judgments. And this is true for all of us as humans around the world. Unfortunately, unconscious bias is often associated in a negative way, but it could also be positive. And just with availability bias or confirmation bias, we see unconscious bias arise in cyber as well. In decision-making, I've seen executives blindly trust the IT team because they're perceived as being the experts. And we all know that there has been a cyber security skills shortage over the years. No disrespect to my IT or InfoSec friends. However, I recommend reviewing the data and asking for a second opinion before blindly trusting or jumping on the bandwagon to agree or disagree with something. Often it's easy to go with the majority to not rock the boat. But if you feel that something needs to be changed or needs to be addressed differently, don't be afraid to go against the flow. Mark Twain has been quoted as saying, whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. And that's something to think about is the majority always right? Sometimes it is and sometimes it isn't, but it's always good to ask that question. With respect to risk assessment, Some people feel that older workers are more of a risk to company than younger workers because older workers aren't up to date with newer technologies. But some people feel that younger people are more of a risk because they engage in risky behaviors like sharing passwords with friends or sharing the same passwords across applications. And as a result, security analysts may focus on the wrong area as the source of a security risk or issue based on their biases and not actually, again, looking at the data at hand. For incident response, if there was an incident, how would you respond? Would you blame the unsecure IT environment that you feel you have? Or would you feel that the incompetent end users were the problem? Or would you look at the facts and the evidence inside and outside of your beliefs to determine what exactly happened? How would you and your team respond to the incident? If your security operations team felt that IT hadn't done their part prior to the incident, you may actually be looking in the wrong area for the source of the incident that happened. Many of us have heard of the acronym called PEBCAC before. And for those of you that don't know what it means, it's the problem exists between the keyboard and chair. And a lot of times we tend to default that the problem is PEBCAC, or is it really lie somewhere else in one of our responsible areas? And it's not actually the end user's fault here. For policies and procedures, when was the last time your cybersecurity policies and procedures were thoroughly reviewed? Let's say that you feel that your SOC analyst is just amazing and you trust everything that they say. Well, because you're implicitly trusting your analyst, you may not think to dive into the details. And as a result, you could have a firewall running without defined rules if you've actually never checked that data. For IAM, the Identity and Access Management, security analysts and software developers may blame users for issues and fail to look at their internal infrastructure or maybe their own code for the problem, and instead be focusing again on a wrong area. To overcome unconscious and implicit bias, be sure to make sure that you're sticking with facts and asking all the stakeholders, including those you may not like or agree with, for inputs. It's important to get the full picture. And sometimes people that you may not agree with may actually have a good opinion and a good possibility of somewhere you need to look and investigate. And also be sure to look in the mirror at yourself, because we all carry biases, whether we like it or not. Did you make a mistake, or are you excusing your behavior instead of actually facing it? Don't be afraid to follow in the words of Mark Twain and pause and reflect to ensure that you're not actually just going with the majority because that's the safe option. Make sure you're hiring the right person with the right skills, making the correct decisions, and addressing the incidents in the correct way, using the data to help guide you and not following on your gut instincts always. Safety bias is another bias that we see. And safety bias is focusing on the shortcomings so as not to take a risk. Many studies have shown that we as humans would prefer not to lose money, even more than we'd prefer to gain money. You may have heard about experiments where people were offered various amounts of money. And for example, what if I said, I was going to offer you $100 now, or I'll give you $500 if you wait 2 years. Most people will take the sure thing now rather than waiting to get more money later. But what we've seen in studies is this changes when people are faced with a loss decision. For instance, if I said you would definitely lose $100 now, or you could have a 50% chance of losing only $1,000, most would say they'll take the option of losing the risk, actually, of losing that $1,000 instead of going for the sure thing. And so what we see as safety biases slows us down in progress of decision making and hold us back from healthy forms of risk taking. And so where we see this in security is around our DevOps. Is your DevOps team applying traditional network controls to your cloud activities? Or are they looking at how they can refactor your applications for the cloud to take your organization to the next level? For your risk assessment, when was the last time you reviewed your security products and their capabilities? Are you keeping with what you have because you've already purchased those solutions and they're working just fine? For example, do you know if your current solutions have a vulnerability scanner that can identify advanced vulnerabilities? Have you ever checked? Because things are working just fine, you may never think to check. And because it's not talked about in the news, you just keep going with what you currently have. For your policies and procedures, remember my $100 and $500 example? That same thinking causes companies to invest in solutions that may be overkill to address their specific high impact and low probability risk factors. So they may be having way extra products that they don't actually need because they're planning to prepare for that next shark attack that has a low probability of actually happening. For decision making, when you have a lack of information or ambiguity, you can see system owners are being reluctant to upgrade their systems. They don't necessarily want to apply the latest patches. They may have an unwillingness of end users to configure safety features. And there could be a lack of interest from developers to add in new security features to existing applications. And as a result, system owners err on the side of caution because they don't want to break anything since, again, they don't see a bigger impact. We haven't had those problems yet, so why do I need to put those latest patches? Or are they error on the siding of cost and saying, you know what, we can't afford to add in those new upgrades or new products. And so again, they just don't do anything and take the safe route. For identity and access management, as you move from your on-prem to your cloud solutions, have you considered what software applications need to be refactored to run as cloud native? What new identity analytics solutions need to be put in place so you're preparing for the future? Have you thought about all of those? Or again, are you just kind of going with what you have today because it's the safe route? Some of our social scientists have also called the ostrich effect here with safety bias. And if we think of it, the ostrich effect is based on this myth that ostriches bury their heads in the sand when they sense danger. And so is your team burying their head in the sand when they need to make a risky decision because they don't want to take that risk? So instead, they just keep going the way it's been done for years and years, because again, it's the safe route and you haven't had a breach yet. So to overcome safety bias, one of the things that I do recommend is get some distance between you and the decision being made. So for example, imagine a past self already having made the choice successfully to make a change that there won't be a loss in that environment. Another idea is if you feel that there is something happening in your environment related to safety bias, is that you can also balance out your team members with more risk-taking team members, those who are more comfortable with taking that risk, or even bring in a third party that can help you provide that unbiased opinion and take a risk for you and look at and help you move to that next level. There's many biases that are out there, and I know that we've spent time going through some, and I just want to touch briefly on a few others that could arise in your environment. And remember, none of these are mutually exclusive. They all definitely overlap and relate to each other in many ways. So if we look at the framing effect, the framing effect actually is very similar to safety bias in a lot of ways, because the framing effect is how something is framed and how it's positioned to you. So for example, if something is worded in a negative way to emphasize the potential for loss, then you may be afraid to take a risk. So you may have seen commercials for services that say 1 in 5 companies lost their data while using another service. But instead of focusing that there was 4 companies that didn't lose their data, they focused on the one that did lose their data, so that way you would think about them to protect you instead of another company. But if they positioned it as 4 companies didn't lose their data with that other service, that's not going to sell or make their company sound in a great light. And then you might not be as reluctant to use them. Another example is, let's say that you needed an operation and a doctor came in and told you that, you have an 80% chance of recovery. But what if the doctor came in and said, you actually only have a 20% chance of death if you have this operation? It's still the same operation and it's the same data, but it's all about how it was framed to you. 80% chance of recovery or 20% chance of death. They still equal 100%. But would you think of differently about how you approach the operation if that doctor came in and said you only had a 20% chance of death? Pay attention to how statements are phrased. And that way you can overcome any kind of instinct or reactions in making that decision. Affinity bias. Affinity bias is gravitating towards what we know or what we are comfortable with. So an example of this is where outside of work or an environment is, let's say that you see somebody, you're out and about, maybe when you travel or something, and you're far away from home, and you see somebody with your college alma mater shirt on, and you're in another city. You instantly feel a connection to them, even though you may have never met this person. And what this does is it creates an in-group bias, because instantly you know, hey, we went to the same school, we experienced a lot of the same things. And so what happens in cyber related to this is it could be around new product offerings. Are you still using those same solutions that you've been using for the last 20 years because they're familiar to you and they're comfortable to you and you like maybe your sales rep? Or are you using the latest solutions that are new to you, and are you taking that risk? But again, it may not feel comfortable to you. You also may see this in cyber in that you may feel that your direct team alone has all of the right answers and no one else knows how to secure your environment better. So you don't need to get a third party perspective or opinion, because nobody knows your environment better than your team does. But again, that's where your affinities start to come into play. And I would challenge you to look at your environment and think about where that might be popping up. Similarity bias. Similarity bias occurs is when we have, or us as humans, we're highly motivated to see ourselves and those who are similar to us in a favorable light. So similar to the affinity bias, we create those in groups and those out groups. So those who went to the same college as us, those that live in the same city, same state, same country, etc., we create those similarity biases with them, and we may treat them differently, or we may trust their opinion or distrust their opinions. And so as you're looking at the people on your team, what do they look like in terms of similarities? Are they similar to what you have in terms of thinking, and what kind of diversity do you have? Or are you looking for the skills and the individuals and the products in areas where you need to be in 1 to 2 years? Or are you still looking at what you have because, again, it's similar, it's comfortable, and it feels right for you because it's safe? As we look to loss aversion, this again is related to a sunk cost. And this is observed where companies have already invested in their traditional IT infrastructure, so why move to the cloud? This takes time, it takes resources. So instead of doing that, companies will keep buying the same new servers over and over and spending a lot of money to keep those on-prem solutions running, instead of being able to look and say, hey, maybe we need to cut our losses and move to a new solution. And distance bias. This is prioritizing what is nearby, whether it's in physical space, time, or other domains. And so prior to the pandemic, when we were all working in conference rooms and in our office, and we had conversations together, how many times did you see that people in the room failed to gather inputs from their remote colleagues on the phone? Or did you make a decision based on what you needed to do right now instead of considering those long-term effects on what was best for the company? Did you say, well, you know what, we don't have the money this year, so we're going to shut this particular service down, instead of understanding what those long-term impacts are to the company and doing their full analysis? So tips on removing bias. And as you saw in each of the biases that I highlighted, they're not mutually exclusive. There's many overlaps between all of the various types of cognitive biases. And I want to give you some more tips on how to remove those biases. The first one is acknowledge. Acknowledge that the biases exist. Security is not just one product, as you all know. It's a culmination of products, processes, technology, and all of that depends on human behavior. And unfortunately, human behavior lends itself to biases. That's just a fact of life. The second area is seek and review all of your data objectively before making a decision. Don't base that decision on a split-second gut feeling. Don't base it on what was done previously, on the opinion of an expert. Consider how all those options were framed. When looking at that, that's going to address your availability, your confirmation bias, as well as that framing effect. The third area, include everyone that needs to be an inputter on a decision or even how to handle an incident, including those who you may not like. This is going to address your confirmation bias as well as your unconscious bias. Your fourth area is to utilize third-party companies to help evaluate in an unbiased way. By having a third-party company come in, they can look at your situation, they can look at your posture, they can do your pen testing, they can look at things that aren't necessarily things that you may have thought about, and then you can make the decision based on the data. The fifth way is really looking to the future without attachment to the past. So this addresses your safety bias, your loss aversion, affinity, and similarity bias. So ensuring that you're also using monitoring tools that have capabilities to understand human weaknesses and provide those proper analysis based on the user behavior. So look for things like UBA or user behavior analytics to help with that. And the last tip is don't group human behaviors together. Instead, really look more at individual behaviors, including your own. Educate your employees that cyber issues are often due to cognitive biases, and attackers target this in combination with technical flaws to exploit systems. We often hear that phishing is still one of the main ways that attackers get into environments, and that's true because they play on our weaknesses as humans. They play on our biases, and they get us to click on those links which start to download things that we definitely don't want in our environments. So applying what you have learned. Next week, acknowledge that those possibility of biases and flaws in your environment exist. Examine where you may have biases influencing your cybersecurity posture. This is going to require personal insight and empathy. It's not going to be easy because, again, it takes a lot to admit that we all have those biases and that they all are there, and we may have made the wrong decision. But it's better to make the wrong or correct that wrong decision than find your company name ending up in the newspaper because of a cybersecurity incident. We definitely don't want that. Over the next 3 months, you want to educate others where and how biases could be impacting that cybersecurity posture. There is a blog on this topic out on our McAfee.com blog site. Just search for the title and you'll see it out there. And you can share that with your colleagues to educate them on all of the topics that we've touched on today. You also be sure to review your cyber security posture and adjust it as necessary. Things change. Techniques change, attackers change, our environments have changed. When was the last time you reviewed that? And be sure that you're keeping up to date. It's never too late to start if you haven't looked at it in a while. And within 6 months, be sure to build habits across your teams to ensure that you're consciously removing biases. This is not a one and done thing because biases don't go away. They continue over and over. And as you have new team players come into play and new challenges and new things that you need to consider in your environment, you always want to rebuild those habits and keep revisiting them because you want to make sure that your cybersecurity posture is the strongest it can be. And so in summary, awareness is just one of the awareness of your cognitive biases is the first step of it. And being sure that your teams know what's going on and know what is out there and making sure that you're not at risk. Our adversaries are well aware that humans have these weaknesses and will try to exploit them. So what can you do to remove biases as much as possible inside your organization and improve across all levels? We definitely don't want to see your company name in the news. We definitely want to help you. And so please take this to heart and how you can remove biases from your environment. Thank you very much. And I look forward to answering your questions in chat.